Sara Martinez had always believed that small acts of kindness ripple outward in ways we never see coming. Working double shifts at Murphy's Diner wasn't glamorous, but when her coworker Jessica called in tears because her babysitter canceled, Sara didn't hesitate to cover the evening shift. She had no idea that this simple gesture would unlock a door to a completely different life. As closing time approached, a quiet regular customer she'd served countless times handed her a napkin with a handwritten note and disappeared into the night. Hours later, someone knocked on her cramped apartment door with a small box containing a mysterious key. What that key opened would challenge everything Sara thought she knew about hidden angels and unexpected opportunities. But could a single act of compassion really bridge the gap between struggle and abundance? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Diner buzzed overhead as Sara Martinez wiped down the last table of her morning shift, her movements methodical despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones. At 26, she had learned to find rhythm and routine, to extract purpose from the endless cycle of taking orders, serving coffee, and collecting tips that barely covered her rent in the cramped studio apartment she called home. The diner, with its cracked vinyl booths and perpetually sticky floor, had become her second home over the past 3 years. A place where she knew every regular customer's order by heart and could predict exactly when the coffee machine would start acting up. Her phone buzzed against the pocket of her apron, interrupting her thoughts. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and Sara could hear the distress in her coworker's voice before she even answered. "Sara, I'm so sorry, but I can't make it in tonight. My babysitter just canceled, and I have nowhere to leave Emma. I know you've already worked a full shift, but—" Jessica's voice broke, and Sara could picture her friend's face, probably red with embarrassment and worry. Jessica was a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, and Sara knew how desperately she needed every shift to pay for her daughter's daycare and the tiny apartment they shared across town. "Don't worry about it," Sara said without hesitation, already mentally calculating how the double shift would affect her own plans, which mainly consisted of collapsing on her couch with a frozen dinner and whatever was playing on her old television. "I'll cover for you. Emma needs you more than I need to go home right now." She could hear Jessica's sigh of relief through the phone, followed by a stream of grateful thank yous that made Sara's heart warm despite her growing fatigue. The afternoon crowd at Murphy's was lighter than usual, giving Sara time to observe the familiar faces that populated her world. There was Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday for her usual chicken salad sandwich and sweet tea, always leaving exactly 15% tip calculated to the penny. At the corner booth sat Marcus, a construction worker who ordered black coffee and apple pie, usually reading a paperback novel while he ate. And then there was him, the quiet man in the gray suit who had been coming in twice a week for the past 6 months, always ordering the same thing: chicken soup, wheat toast, and water with no ice. Sara had tried to engage him in conversation numerous times, but their interactions remained pleasantly superficial. He was polite, thanked her genuinely for her service, and left reasonable tips, but there was something about his presence that felt different from her other customers. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that suggested a life beyond the diner's walls, though he never spoke about work or family or anything that might give Sara a glimpse into who he was outside of their brief exchanges. As evening approached and the dinner rush began, Sara felt the familiar ache in her feet that came with hours of standing and walking on the diner's unforgiving floor. Her uniform, a yellow dress that had seen better days, clung to her tired body as she moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with the practiced efficiency that came from years of service work. She watched families enjoy their meals together, couples sharing quiet conversations over dessert, and solo diners lost in their phones or books, all of them part of the human tapestry that made up her daily experience. The quiet man in the gray suit arrived at his usual time, settling into his preferred booth near the window where he could watch the street outside. Sara approached with her notepad, though she already knew what he would order. "Good evening," she said, offering him the same genuine smile she gave to all her customers. "The usual tonight?" He nodded, but something in his expression was different. He seemed to be studying her face more intently than usual, as if seeing her for the first time. "Yes, thank you," he replied, his voice carrying a warmth that Sara hadn't noticed before. "You seem tired tonight. Long day?" Sara was surprised by the personal question. "Just covering an extra shift for a friend," she said, not wanting to burden him with details about Jessica's situation. "Nothing I can't handle." "That's very kind of you," he said, and there was something in his tone that made Sara pause. It wasn't just polite conversation. It sounded like genuine appreciation. Not everyone would do that. As Sara returned to the kitchen to place his order, she found herself wondering about the man's comment. In her experience, most people would help a friend in need, wouldn't they? But as she thought about it, she realized that many of her other coworkers had declined to cover shifts when asked, citing their own plans or fatigue. Maybe what felt natural to her wasn't as common as she had assumed. The dinner rush intensified, and Sara lost herself in the familiar dance of taking orders, delivering food, and managing the constant demands of a busy restaurant. Her feet throbbed, and she could feel a headache building behind her eyes, but she pushed through with the determination that had carried her through countless difficult shifts. She watched the man in the gray suit eat his meal in thoughtful silence, occasionally glancing up at her as she worked, though he quickly looked away when their eyes met. As the evening wore on, customers began to thin out, and Sara found herself counting the minutes until closing time. Her body ached with exhaustion, and she longed for the moment when she could lock the door behind the last customer and begin the closing routine that would finally allow her to go home. The man in the gray suit had finished his meal but seemed to be lingering, occasionally sipping his water while watching the activity around him. At 10:30, Sara began her closing duties, wiping down tables and stacking chairs, while the last few customers finished their meals. The man in the gray suit was still there, apparently in no hurry to leave, which struck Sara as unusual, since he typically departed shortly after finishing his meal. She approached his table with the check, trying not to let her fatigue show in her voice. "Here you go," she said, placing the small piece of paper on the table. "Take your time." He looked up at her with those same thoughtful eyes. "Actually, I was wondering if I could ask you something." Sara paused, surprised by the request. "Of course. The friend you're covering for tonight, is she in a difficult situation?" The question caught Sara off guard. She wasn't sure how much to share with a customer, even one who seemed genuinely concerned. "She's a single mother," Sara said carefully. "Sometimes childcare falls through, and she can't afford to miss work." The man nodded, as if this confirmed something he had been thinking. "And you didn't hesitate to help her?" "It wasn't really a choice," Sara replied honestly. "She needed help, and I was available. That's what friends do." Something shifted in the man's expression, a kind of recognition or understanding that Sara couldn't quite interpret. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pen, then took a napkin from the dispenser and began writing something on it. Sara watched curiously as he folded the napkin carefully and placed it on the table beside his payment. "Thank you," he said, standing up and putting on his coat. "For everything." Before Sara could respond, he was walking toward the door, leaving her standing beside the table with the folded napkin in her hand. She unfolded it carefully and read the words written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for showing me what true character looks like. Your kindness tonight won't be forgotten." Sara read the note twice, touched by the unexpected sentiment but also puzzled by its intensity. She had simply covered a shift for a friend, nothing more. Yet something about the man's behavior and his words suggested that her actions had affected him more deeply than she could understand. She folded the napkin and slipped it into her apron pocket, then finished closing the diner with the note's words echoing in her mind. The walk home to her apartment building was longer than usual, her tired legs protesting every step. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, with most residents already settled in for the night. Sara's building was a modest 3-story structure that had seen better days, with a flickering hallway light and a front door that stuck in humid weather. Her studio apartment was on the 2nd floor, a cramped space that she had tried to make cozy with thrift store furniture and plants that somehow survived despite the limited natural light. She climbed the stairs slowly, her keys already in her hand, looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and her bed. As she reached her floor, she was surprised to see a figure standing in the hallway near her door. Sara's heart rate quickened, and she hesitated on the stairs, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The figure was a woman, well-dressed and carrying a small package, and she looked up as Sara appeared. "Are you Sara Martinez?" the woman asked, her voice professional but kind. "Yes," Sara replied cautiously, still maintaining some distance. "Can I help you?" The woman stepped forward, extending the package toward Sara. "I was asked to deliver this to you tonight. I'm sorry for the late hour, but I was told it was important that you receive it today." Sara approached slowly, studying the woman's face for any sign of deception or danger. The woman appeared to be in her 40s, dressed in a business suit that suggested she was some kind of professional messenger or assistant. The package was small, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. "Who asked you to deliver it?" Sara asked, accepting the package but not yet opening it. "I'm not at liberty to say," the woman replied, "but I can tell you that it's from someone who was very impressed by your actions today. Someone who believes in rewarding kindness when it's given freely." Before Sara could ask more questions, the woman was walking away, her heels clicking on the tiled floor as she headed for the stairs. Sara watched her go, then looked down at the package in her hands. It was heavier than she had expected, and she could feel something solid inside the wrapping. Once inside her apartment, Sara sat on her small couch and carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a wooden box, simple but well-made, with a brass latch. She opened it to find a single key nestled in blue velvet, accompanied by a card with an address she didn't recognize. The address was in Riverside Heights, an upscale neighborhood across town that Sara had driven through but never imagined living in. Beneath the key was a folded piece of paper, and Sara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The handwriting was the same as the note on the napkin, neat and deliberate. "Your apartment is fully paid for 1 year. The lease is in your name. Sometimes angels come disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary things. You helped someone today without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of leadership this world needs more of. Use this gift to help others the way you helped your friend. Simon Grant." End quote. Sara read the note 3 times, each reading making the words feel more surreal. Simon Grant, she realized with a start, was the name of the billionaire real estate developer whose face occasionally appeared in the local newspaper's business section. He owned half the commercial buildings downtown and had a reputation for both shrewd business practices and unexpected philanthropic gestures. But how could he be the quiet man in the gray suit who had been coming to Murphy's Diner for months? She picked up the key, feeling its weight in her palm. The metal was warm from being in the box, and she could see her reflection in its polished surface. The address on the card was only 20 minutes away, but it might as well have been on another planet given the difference between that neighborhood and her current surroundings. Sleep was impossible that night. Sara lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened. Every rational part of her mind insisted that this had to be some kind of mistake or elaborate prank. People didn't just give away luxury apartments to waitresses who covered extra shifts. Yet the key felt real in her hand, and the note bore the unmistakable handwriting of the man who had observed her with such attention that evening. As dawn broke through her single window, Sara made a decision. She would drive to the address and see what, if anything, the key actually opened. If it was a mistake, she would return the key and chalk the whole experience up to an strange encounter. If it was real, well, she would figure out what to do next. The drive to Riverside Heights took her through neighborhoods that grew progressively more affluent, from modest single-family homes to sprawling estates with manicured lawns and gated driveways. The address led her to a modern apartment complex called Riverside Towers, a sleek glass and steel structure that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than in Sara's real life. She parked her aging Honda Civic in a visitor's space, feeling self-conscious about its dented bumper and peeling paint in the midst of the luxury cars that filled the parking garage. The lobby was all marble and contemporary art, with a doorman who looked up from his desk as she entered. "Good morning," he said with a professional smile. "How can I help you?" Sara held up the key, unsure of the protocol. I was given this key and an address. I'm supposed to have an apartment here? The doorman's expression shifted to one of recognition. You must be Ms. Martinez. Mr. Grant's assistant called yesterday to let us know you'd be arriving. You're in Unit 8047. The elevator is just over there. The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt like ascending to another world. Sara had never been in a building this luxurious, with its polished brass fixtures and subtle instrumental music playing through hidden speakers. When the doors opened, she found herself in a carpeted hallway lined with what appeared to be original artwork. Unit 8047 was at the end of the hall, and Sara's hand shook slightly as she inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the door opened to reveal a space that took her breath away. The apartment was furnished with modern, expensive-looking furniture in neutral tones that created an atmosphere of serene elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and Sara could see the river winding through the downtown area in the distance. She walked through the space slowly, taking in details that confirmed this was no temporary arrangement. The kitchen was fully stocked with high-end appliances and granite countertops. The bedroom contained a king-size bed with crisp white linens and a walk-in closet larger than her entire current apartment. The bathroom featured a soaking tub and a shower with multiple heads, all in gleaming marble. On the dining room table, Sara found another envelope with her name written in that same careful handwriting. Inside was a lease agreement, already signed by Simon Grant as the landlord, with her name listed as the tenant. The terms were exactly as the note had promised. 1 year. Fully paid, with all utilities included. There was also a bank card with her name on it, and a note explaining that it was connected to an account containing enough money to cover groceries and other necessities for the year. Sara sank into the leather sofa, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened to her. This wasn't just a gift. It was a complete transformation of her circumstances. She thought about her cramped studio apartment with its flickering lights and thin walls, then looked around at the spacious luxury that was apparently now hers. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and Sara realized with a start that she was supposed to work the morning shift at Murphy's. "Sara, I'm so sorry to call you so early," Jessica said, her voice thick with exhaustion. "I wanted to thank you again for covering for me last night. I don't know what I would have done." "Don't worry about it," Sara replied, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "How's Emma?" "She's fine. I found a new babysitter for next week, so hopefully this won't happen again." Jessica paused. "Are you okay? You sound different." Sara looked around the apartment, still struggling to believe it was real. "I'm fine. Just tired from the double shift. I might be a few minutes late this morning. Take your time. You've earned it." After ending the call, Sara sat in the silence of her new apartment, trying to understand what Simon Grant expected from her. His note had mentioned using the gift to help others, but what did that mean exactly? She thought about Jessica, struggling to balance work and motherhood, and wondered if this was the kind of situation he had in mind. The next few days passed in a blur of surreal adjustment. Sara continued working at Murphy's, partly because she needed the routine, and partly because she wasn't sure what else to do with herself. She hadn't told anyone about the apartment, uncertain how to explain something she barely understood herself. Instead, she found herself studying her regular customers with new eyes, noticing details about their lives that she had previously overlooked. There was Mrs. Patterson, who always came in alone and never mentioned family or friends. Marcus, the construction worker, who sometimes counted out his payment in small bills and loose change. The teenage girl who came in after school and ordered only coffee, nursing it for hours while doing homework. Sara began to see patterns of loneliness and struggle that she had been too busy to notice before. A week after receiving the key, Sara was working the evening shift when she noticed a new customer, a young woman with a baby who looked to be about 6 months old. The woman ordered only a cup of coffee and a glass of water, declining the menu when Sara offered it. She sat in a corner booth, gently bouncing the baby while staring out the window with an expression of profound exhaustion. Sara watched the woman throughout the evening, noting how she made the single cup of coffee last for hours, and how she seemed to be gathering courage for something. When the diner began to empty, Sara approached the woman's table. "Can I get you anything else?" Sara asked gently. The woman looked up with eyes that had clearly been crying. "I'm sorry for taking up the booth so long. I can leave if you need the table." "Don't worry about it," Sara said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Aunt Sara, what's your name?" "Michelle," the woman replied, adjusting the baby in her arms. "This is David." Sara smiled at the baby, who gurgled and reached out toward her. "He's beautiful. Are you from around here?" Michelle shook her head. "We're just passing through. I was supposed to meet someone, but—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. "But they didn't show up?" Sara guessed. "Something like that." Michelle's voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I had a place to stay, but it fell through. I have a little money, but not enough for a hotel room." Sara felt her heart clench. She thought about her own warm apartment, with its comfortable bed and fully stocked kitchen, then looked at this young mother who clearly had nowhere to go. "Do you have family you can call?" "No," Michelle said simply. "It's just me and David." Without hesitation, Sara made a decision that felt both terrifying and completely natural. "I have a place you can stay," she said. "It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe, and there's room for both of you." Michelle's eyes widened. "I couldn't impose on you like that. You don't even know me." "I know you're a mother trying to take care of her child," Sara replied. "Sometimes, that's enough." That night, Sara brought Michelle and David to the apartment in Riverside Towers, watching Michelle's amazement as they entered the luxurious space. Sara had prepared a story about house-sitting for a friend, not ready to explain the truth about how she had come to live there. She set up the guest room for Michelle and David, then made dinner while Michelle gave the baby a bath in the marble bathroom. Over the next few days, Sara learned Michelle's story. She was 19, originally from a small town 3 hours away, and had moved to the city with her boyfriend when she learned she was pregnant. The boyfriend had disappeared 2 months after David was born, leaving Michelle with no support system and mounting debts. She'd been evicted from her apartment and was trying to find a new start somewhere else when her last lead fell through. "I don't understand why you're helping me," Michelle said one evening as they sat on the sofa, watching David play with some toys Sara had bought. "Most people would have just given me directions to a shelter." Sara thought about Simon Grant's note, about using the gift to help others. "I had help when I needed it once," she said. "I guess I'm just passing it along." Michelle stayed for 2 weeks, during which time Sara helped her find a job at a local daycare center and a small apartment she could afford. The daycare job was perfect because Michelle could bring David with her, solving her childcare problem while giving her a steady income. Sara used some of the money from the bank account Simon Grant had provided to cover Michelle's security deposit and first month's rent. On the day Michelle moved out, she hugged Sara tightly. "I'll pay you back," she said. "Every penny. Just help someone else when you can," Sara replied. "That's payment enough." As the weeks passed, Sara found herself drawn into a pattern of noticing and helping. She paid for Mrs. Patterson's meal when she saw the elderly woman counting out exact change, then struck up a conversation that revealed Mrs. Patterson was a retired teacher living on a fixed income. Sara began inviting her to join her for coffee during slow periods, and their friendship blossomed into something that enriched both their lives. She helped Marcus when she learned he was studying for his GED at night, bringing him books from the library and quizzing him during his coffee breaks. The teenage girl who came in after school turned out to be working a part-time job to help support her family, and Sara quietly arranged for her to receive free meals by telling her manager that the girl was helping Gia with small tasks around the diner. Each act of kindness felt natural and necessary, but Sara began to understand that her ability to help was amplified by the resources Simon Grant had provided. The apartment gave her a sense of security that allowed her to take risks for others, and the money he had left her provided practical help when people needed it most. One evening, almost 2 months after receiving the key, Sara was surprised to see Simon Grant walk into Murphy's diner. He was dressed in the same gray suit, carrying himself with the same quiet dignity, but now Sara knew who he was. He took his usual booth and waited for her to approach. The usual? Sara asked, her voice betraying her nervousness. Please, he said, studying her face. You look well. Are you settling in comfortably? Sara glanced around to make sure no one could overhear them. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly. What you did, it's changed everything. From what I hear, you're changing things for others too, Simon replied. That was the point. Sara realized he had been keeping track of her activities somehow. How did you know? I make it my business to know when my investments are paying off, he said with a slight smile. Mrs. Patterson mentioned her new friend at the diner when she wrote to thank me for the scholarship fund I established at the school where she used to teach. Marcus's SPIA GED instructor called to tell me about the student who was getting extra help from a waitress. And Michelle sent me a letter about the stranger who gave her a new start. Sara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I wasn't trying to impress you. I was just helping people who needed it. I know, Simon said. That's exactly why you were the right person for this gift. You didn't help them because you thought I was watching. You helped them because that's who you are. Sara brought him his order, and they talked quietly as he ate. Simon explained that he had been visiting Murphy's Diner for months, not just as a regular customer, but as someone searching for something he couldn't quite name. He had built a successful business empire, but he had begun to feel disconnected from the human impact of his work. I have the resources to help people, he said, but I'd lost sight of what help actually looks like. I was writing checks to charities and attending fundraising galas, but I wasn't seeing the individuals who needed assistance. When I started coming here, I was looking for something real, something that would remind me why I wanted to succeed in the first place. And you found it by watching me serve coffee? Sara asked with a gentle smile. I found it by watching you treat every customer like they mattered, Simon replied. By seeing you stay late to help that teenager with her homework, or listening to Mrs. Patterson's stories about her students, or defending Marcus when that rude customer complained about his work clothes. You were doing the work I thought I was doing, but you were doing it with your whole heart. Sara began to understand that the gift had been as much about Simon's needs as her own. Why didn't you just tell me who you were? Because I needed to see who you really were, he said. Anyone can be kind when they think they're being watched by someone powerful. But you were kind when you thought no one important was paying attention. That's the difference between performance and character. As their conversation continued, Simon revealed his broader vision. He had been developing a program to identify and support people who were making a difference in their communities, not through grand gestures, but through daily acts of compassion and leadership. Sara's experience was a pilot program, a way to test whether providing resources to naturally generous people would amplify their impact. I want to expand this, Simon said. I want to find more people like you, people who are already helping others, but who could do more with the right support. I want to create a network of everyday leaders who can transform their communities from the ground up. Sara felt a flutter of excitement mixed with uncertainty. What would that look like? I'm not entirely sure yet, Simon admitted. That's why I need your help. You understand this world in a way I never could. You know what people actually need, and you know how to provide it without making them feel like charity cases. I want you to help me design a program that works. Over the following weeks, Sara and Simon met regularly to discuss his vision. Sara continued working at Murphy's, but she also began researching community needs and developing ideas for how to address them. She learned that Simon's business success had come partly from his ability to see potential where others saw only problems, and she began to understand that he saw the same kind of potential in her. Their first initiative was a microgrant program for single parents, inspired by Sara's experience with Michelle. They identified working parents who needed small amounts of help to overcome specific obstacles, things like car repairs that would prevent them from getting to work, or childcare deposits that would allow them to take better jobs. The grants were small, usually under $1,000, but they were designed to provide exactly the right help at exactly the right moment. Sara coordinated the program, using her connections at the diner and in the community to identify people who would benefit. She developed a simple application process that respected people's dignity while ensuring the money went to legitimate needs. Within 6 months, they had helped 30 families, and the success stories were remarkable. There was Janet, a single mother who used her grant to repair her car so she could take a job with better hours and higher pay. Robert, a father of two who needed help with a security deposit for an apartment in a better school district. Carmen, who used her grant to pay for certification classes that led to a promotion at her job. Each story reinforced Sara's belief that small interventions at the right time could change entire life trajectories. As the program grew, Sara found herself taking on increasing responsibilities. Simon offered her a position as the program director, with a salary that would allow her to leave Murphy's and focus entirely on the work. Sara was torn between excitement about the opportunity and loyalty to the diner that had been her home for so long. "You're worried about leaving your customers behind," Simon observed during one of their meetings. "They're not just customers," Sara replied. "They're my community. Mrs. Patterson looks forward to our conversations. Marcus is finally close to passing his GED. The teenage girl, Anna, is applying to colleges now. I feel like I'm abandoning them." "You're not abandoning them," Simon said gently. "You're expanding your ability to help them and others like them. Besides, who says you can't still visit the diner? Some of the best leaders I know never forget where they came from." Sara eventually accepted the position, though she negotiated to work part-time at Murphy's for a few hours each week. She wanted to maintain her connection to the place that had taught her so much about human nature and community. Her new role allowed her to develop programs that addressed needs she had observed firsthand, and her credibility with the community came from her lived experience rather than academic credentials. The microgrant program evolved into a comprehensive support network that included mentorship, job training, and community-building initiatives. Sara hired other people who had overcome significant challenges, creating a team that understood the populations they served. Michelle became one of her first employees, using her experience as a young single mother to help others in similar situations. 2 years after receiving the mysterious key, Sara stood in the conference room of the Simon Grant Foundation, looking out at the city where she had served coffee and cleaned tables. The foundation now operated programs in 12 cities, helping thousands of people each year. Sara had become a sought-after speaker on community development and had been featured in several national magazines as an example of innovative leadership. But for all her success, Sara never forgot the lesson Simon had taught her that first night: that true leadership happens when no one is watching. In the small moments when we choose to help others simply because they need help. She still carried the original napkin note in her wallet, a reminder of the power of recognizing and rewarding kindness. Simon joined her at the window, both of them watching the evening traffic move through the streets below. "Any regrets?" he asked. Sara thought about her old studio apartment, her aching feet after double shifts, the constant worry about making ends meet. Then she thought about Michelle, who now owned her own daycare center. About Mrs. Patterson, who had become a volunteer literacy tutor. About Marcus, who had earned his GED and was now studying to become an electrician. About Anna, who was thriving in her first year of college. "None," Sara said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Simon smiled. "I knew you were special that first night I saw you stay late to help that girl with her homework, but I don't think even I realized how special." "You took a big risk," Sara said, "giving a complete stranger the resources to change her life." "It wasn't a risk," Simon replied. "Character isn't something you can fake over time. I watched you for months, and you were consistently kind, consistently fair, consistently generous with whatever you had to give. Success doesn't change who you are at your prettier core. It just gives you more resources to express it." As the sun set over the city, Sara reflected on the journey that had brought her from Murphy's Diner to this moment. The waitress who had covered a shift for a struggling friend had become a leader in her community, not through grand gestures or inherited advantages, but through the simple practice of paying attention to others and responding with compassion. She thought about the ripple effects of that one evening when she had decided to help Jessica. If she hadn't covered that shift, she never would have received the note from Simon. If she hadn't received the note, she never would have been given the apartment and the resources that allowed her to help others. If she hadn't helped Michelle, she might never have understood how small interventions could transform lives. The foundation's work continued to expand, but Sara insisted on maintaining certain principles that reflected her origins. Every program was designed to preserve dignity, to provide help without creating dependency, and to recognize that people in difficult circumstances were often just one opportunity away from success. The staff was trained to see clients as whole people rather than problems to be solved, and success was measured not just in numbers, but in the stories of transformation that emerged from their work. Sara's own story had become one of those transformations, a reminder that extraordinary things could happen when ordinary people chose to act with extraordinary compassion. She had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or square footage, but in the ability to make a positive difference in the lives of others. As she prepared to leave the office that evening, Sara made a decision that had been forming in her mind for weeks. She would return to Murphy's Diner, not as an employee, but as a customer, to sit in the booth where Simon had first observed her, and to remember the person she had been before her life changed so dramatically. The diner looked exactly the same, with its cracked vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights. Sara ordered coffee and pie from the waitress who had replaced her, a young woman named Linda, who reminded Sara of herself at that age. She watched Linda work, noting the same careful attention to customers, the same willingness to listen to their stories, the same small acts of kindness that had once been Sara's daily routine. When Linda brought her check, Sara left a tip that would cover more than the cost of the meal. She also left a note. "Thank you for treating your customers like family. Your kindness matters more than you know." As Sara walked out into the evening air, she felt a sense of completion. She had traveled full circle, from waitress to foundation director, but the essential part of her remained unchanged. She was still the person who would cover a shift for a friend, who would listen to a customer's troubles, who would help without expecting anything in return. The key Simon had given her had unlocked more than just a luxury apartment. It had unlocked her potential to make a difference on a scale she had never imagined. But the real key, she realized, had been inside her all along. The simple understanding that we are all connected, that everyone has a story worth hearing, and that small acts of kindness can create extraordinary change. Years later, when Sara told her story to groups of young professionals and community leaders, she always ended with the same message. You don't need a mysterious benefactor to change the world. You just need to pay attention to the people around you and respond with your whole heart. The resources will follow, but the compassion has to come first. The Simon Grant Foundation continued to grow, but Sara never forgot that its success was built on a foundation of everyday kindness, the kind that happens in diners and offices and schools and neighborhoods every day. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about having all the answers or the most resources. It was about being willing to see others clearly and to act on what you saw. The Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration was held in the ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, attended by politicians, business leaders, and community activists. Sara stood at the podium in an elegant dress that would have cost more than her monthly rent at the old studio apartment, looking out at an audience that included many of the people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. Michelle sat at the front table, now the owner of 3 successful daycare centers and a respected voice in early childhood education advocacy. Mrs. Patterson was there too, having received a community service award for her volunteer work. Marcus had brought his new wife and their baby daughter, proud to introduce them to the woman who had helped him believe in his potential. Anna, now a college graduate working as a social worker, had flown in from her new job in another state. But what moved Sara most was seeing the current staff of Murphy's Diner in the audience. Linda, the waitress who had replaced her, sat with several other employees who had heard Sara's story and been inspired to look for their own opportunities to help others. The diner had become an unofficial partner of the foundation, with staff members identifying customers who might benefit from the various programs. 5 years ago, Sara began her speech. I was a waitress who thought helping others meant bringing them coffee and remembering their usual order. I learned that night that helping others is actually about seeing them, really seeing them, and responding to what they need with whatever you have to give. She told the story of that evening when she had covered Jessica's shift, careful to explain how each small decision had led to larger opportunities. She spoke about the importance of maintaining humility even as resources and responsibilities grew, and about the danger of losing sight of individual stories in the pursuit of impressive statistics. "The real heroes aren't the people who write the checks," Sara continued, glancing at Simon, who sat beaming in the front row. "They're the people who show up every day, who listen to their neighbors, who offer help without being asked. They're the teachers who stay late with struggling students, the nurses who hold patients' hands, the shop owners who extend credit to families going through hard times. They're the people who understand that changing the world happens one person at a time, one interaction at a time, one act of kindness at a time." After the formal celebration ended, Sara found herself in a quiet corner of the hotel bar with Simon, both of them reflecting on how far they had come. The foundation now operated in 25 cities, had helped tens of thousands of people, and had inspired similar initiatives across the country. Sara had been invited to speak at conferences around the world, and her book about community-based leadership had become a bestseller. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed you that night?" Simon asked, swirling the ice in his drink. "I think I would have kept helping people," Sara replied thoughtfully. "Maybe not on this scale, but I would have kept doing what felt right. That's what I learned from all of this, that the impulse to help others isn't dependent on having resources. It's dependent on having awareness and compassion." Simon nodded. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how many people like you are out there, doing good work without recognition or support. We've helped a lot of people, but we've only scratched the surface. So what's come next?" Sara asked, though she could see from his expression that he had already been planning. "I want to create a network," Simon said. "Not just of programs, but of people. I want to find the waitresses and teachers and shop owners and nurses who are already making a difference. And I want to connect them with each other. I want to create a movement of everyday leaders who can learn from each other and support each other." Sara felt the familiar flutter of excitement that came with new challenges. "That sounds like the kind of project that could change everything." "It is," Simon agreed. "And I can't think of anyone better to lead it than the woman who started this whole thing by covering a shift for a friend." Over the following months, Sara threw herself into developing what they called the Everyday Leaders Network. The concept was simple but revolutionary. Identify people who were already making a positive impact in their communities, provide them with modest support and resources, and connect them with others doing, quote, similar work. The network grew organically, with members nominating others they had observed making a difference. There was David, a barber who had turned his shop into an informal community center where teenagers could get free haircuts and mentorship. There was Maria, a grocery store clerk who had started a program to distribute expired but still good food to families in need. There was James, a bus driver who had created a mobile library, keeping books on his bus for children who rode his route. Each member received a small annual stipend, access to training and resources, and most importantly, connection to a community of people who understood their work. They held quarterly gatherings where members shared their experiences, learned from each other, and developed new initiatives. Sara traveled constantly, visiting network members and learning about their communities. She found that the most effective helpers were often people who had experienced hardship themselves and had developed deep empathy for others facing similar challenges. They understood that dignity was as important as assistance, and they knew how to provide help in ways that empowered rather than diminished. The network's impact was measured not just in numbers, but in the ripple effects of individual transformations. When Maria's food distribution program prevented a family from going hungry, their children were better able to focus in school. When David's mentorship helped a teenager avoid gang involvement, that young person went on to college and eventually returned to help others. When James's mobile library improved literacy rates in his community, parents became more engaged in their children's education. 3 years after launching the network, Sara received a call that brought her full circle. Linda from Murphy's Diner had been nominated for membership by one of her regular customers, who had noticed how she consistently went above and beyond to help people in small but meaningful ways. "I don't know if I'm the kind of person you're looking for," Linda said when Sara called to discuss the nomination. "I'm just a waitress." So was I, Sara replied with a smile. That's exactly the kind of person we're looking for. Linda's induction into the network was celebrated at Murphy's Diner, with many of the founding members attending. As Sara sat in the booth where she had first received Simon's note, she was struck by how the ordinary-looking space had become the birthplace of something extraordinary. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 80s, but still sharp and engaged, sat beside Sara. "You know," the elderly woman said, "I've been thinking about that night when you covered Jessica's shift. Do you think Mr. Grant would have noticed you if you had just done your regular job that evening?" Sara considered the question. "I think he had been watching me for a while, looking for something. But that night, when I made the choice to help Jessica even though I was tired and wanted to go home, maybe that's when he saw what he was looking for." "Character," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "That's what he saw. The willingness to do the right thing even when it's inconvenient, even when no one important is watching." As the evening wound down, Sara found herself alone with Simon for a few minutes. The diner was nearly empty, just a few late-night customers, and the soft hum of conversation mixed with the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. "Any regrets?" Simon asked, echoing the question he had posed years earlier. Sara looked around the familiar space, then out at the city lights beyond the windows. She thought about the thousands of people whose lives had been touched by the foundation and the network, about the communities that had been strengthened by small acts of kindness, amplified by intentional support. "Just one," she said finally. "I wish I could go back and tell that exhausted waitress, who covered her friend's shift, that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. I wish I could tell her that the kindness she thought was ordinary was actually, extraordinary, and that it would ripple out to touch thousands of lives." End quote. Simon smiled. "I think she knew, somewhere deep down. That's why she made the choice she did." As Sara drove home that night to the apartment that had started it all, she realized that the mysterious key Simon had given her had unlocked more than just a door. It had unlocked her understanding of her own potential and her connection to the vast network of human kindness that exists in every community. The apartment in Riverside Towers had long since been replaced by a house she had purchased with her own earnings, but she had kept the original key as a reminder of the moment when her life had changed direction. She wore it now on a chain around her neck, a talisman that reminded her daily of the power of small acts of kindness and the importance of paying attention to the people around her. The Everyday Leaders Network continued to grow, now operating in 40 states and 3 countries. Sara had become a recognized expert on community development and social change, but she never forgot that her expertise came from her years of serving coffee and listening to customers' stories. She still visited Murphy's Diner regularly, not just to check on the staff, but to remember where she had come from. She would sit in different booths, observing the interactions between servers and customers, looking for the same signs of natural leadership that Simon had recognized in her. On one such visit, she noticed a young man named Carlos, who bussed tables, but also seemed to know every customer's story. She watched him help an elderly man with his coat, listen patiently to a lonely customer's rambling conversation, and gently redirect a drunk patron without causing a scene. She saw in him the same qualities that had caught Simon's attention in her: genuine care for others, quiet competence, and the ability to see people as individuals rather than problems. Before leaving that night, Sara approached Carlos. "I've been watching you work," she said. "You have a gift for making people feel valued." Carlos looked surprised. "I just try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated." "That's exactly what I mean," Sara said, handing him her business card. "I run a program that supports people who are making a difference in their communities. I think you might be interested in what we do." 3 months later, Carlos became the youngest member of the Everyday Leaders Network. His project involved creating a support group for young men who had aged out of the foster care system. Using his own experience and the relationships he had built at the diner to identify and help young people who were struggling with the transition to independent adulthood. Watching Carlos develop his program, Sara was reminded of her own journey from server to leader. She saw how the skills he had learned at the diner, listening to people's stories and responding with empathy, translated directly into his ability to help others navigate difficult circumstances. The network had proven that leadership wasn't about credentials or authority, but about the willingness to see others clearly and respond with compassion. The most effective members were often people who had developed their skills in service industries, healthcare, education, or other fields that required them to understand and respond to human needs. As Sara approached the 10-year anniversary of receiving the mysterious key, she decided to write a second book. This one focused on the stories of network members and the lessons they had learned about community leadership. She spent months traveling and interviewing people, collecting stories that illustrated the power of everyday kindness amplified by intentional support. The book, titled The Ripple Effect: How Small Acts of Kindness Create Extraordinary Change, became an even bigger success than her first. It spawned a documentary film, a TED Talk that was viewed millions of times, and speaking requests from around the world. But for Sara, the real success wasn't measured in book sales or media attention. It was measured in the stories that continued to emerge from the network. The teenager who avoided dropping out of school because of a mentorship program, the elderly woman who found community through a neighborhood support group, the immigrant family who learned English through a volunteer tutoring program. Each story reinforced Sara's belief that the most powerful social change happened not through grand gestures or government programs, but through the accumulation of small acts of care and attention. The network had proven that when you identified and supported people who were already helping others, the impact multiplied exponentially. On the evening of the 10-year anniversary, Sara returned to Murphy's Diner for a private celebration with the people who had been part of her original journey. Jessica was there, now a manager at a different restaurant, but still grateful for the shift Sara had covered all those years ago. Mrs. Patterson came, moving more slowly, but still sharp and engaged. Marcus brought his family, proud to show his children the place where he had studied for his GED. Simon arrived last, looking older, but still carrying himself with the same quiet dignity that had characterized him from the beginning. He sat in his old booth, and Sara brought him his usual order: chicken soup, wheat toast, and water with no ice. 10 years, he said, shaking his head in amazement. Did you ever imagine it would become this? Sara looked around the familiar space, then out at the city where thousands of people were now connected through the network of everyday leaders. I imagined it would matter, she said. I hoped it would help people, but I never imagined it would help so many people, or that it would create something that could sustain itself and keep growing. That's because you built it on the right foundation, Simon replied. You built it on the understanding that everyone has something to offer, and that the role of a leader is to help people discover and develop their gifts. As the evening wound down, Sara found herself thinking about the young woman she had been 10 years earlier, tired and overwhelmed, but willing to help a friend in need. She wondered if that woman could have imagined the trajectory that single decision would create. The key Simon had given her that night had unlocked more than just an apartment. It had unlocked her potential to see leadership not as a position, but as a practice, not as authority, but as service. It had taught her that the most powerful changes began with the simplest acts of human kindness. Sara still carried the original key, now worn smooth from handling, as a reminder of the moment when her life had changed direction. But she had learned that the real key wasn't made of metal. It was made of attention, compassion, and the willingness to act on what you saw. The Everyday Leaders Network would continue to grow, touching more lives and creating more ripples of positive change. But its success would always be rooted in the simple truth that Sara had learned that night at Murphy's Diner: that helping others when no one's watching isn't just kindness, it's leadership in its purest form. As she drove home that night, Sara smiled at the thought of all the waitresses and teachers and shop owners and bus drivers who were out there right now, making a difference in ways they might not even recognize. Tomorrow, she would continue looking for them, supporting them, and helping them understand that their quiet acts of service were the foundation upon which a better world could be built. The mysterious stranger, who had left her a key, had given her more than an apartment. He had given her a mission, a purpose, and a deep understanding of the power that exists in every human interaction. And Sara had learned that the greatest gift she could give in return was to help others discover that same power within themselves.